There is a city in California of enormous size, one of the largest in the state and in the country. But if you visit it, the first thing you notice is the silence. No traffic jams, no crowded sidewalks. Most of its streets are lines of sand that the wind erases every evening. From the air, the layout is perfect, almost beautiful. On the ground, it's a monument to what never was. Straight streets without a single home, miles of asphalt that lead nowhere. It wasn't an earthquake that killed this city. It wasn't a drought or a financial crisis. It was a brochure, and the man who wrote it knew how to sell the invisible. His name was Nathan Mendelsohn. His friends called him Nat. Born in Eastern Europe, he immigrated as a child to the United States and trained as a sociologist. In 1958, Mendelsohn was neither a builder nor a real estate mogul. He knew that shared illusion is the most valuable currency. He had studied how maps and names project a reality before it exists. In March of that year, he bought 82,000 acres in the Mojave Desert, about 100 miles north of Los Angeles. He paid a pittance, a calculated risk that depended entirely on persuasion. But in his mind, that was already a metropolis. 2 months later, in May 1958, he put the first plots up for sale. Speed matters here. 2 months between buying a desert and starting to sell it. That's not urban planning, that's marketing. Mendelsohn's weapon was a simple brochure. With that glossy pamphlet, Mendelsohn crafted a mirage of dreamy avenues and zoning rules. That document showed no sand or sagebrush. It showed tree-lined avenues, shopping centers, residential neighborhoods. It showed a city of the future that would one day compete with Los Angeles. Mendelsohn wasn't selling land. He was selling a future in which dust turned into lawn. The sociologist had become the greatest dream seller in the West. The brochure was a masterpiece of persuasion. It didn't exactly lie, it simply omitted reality. The mechanism worked like this. Each buyer who paid for a plot raised the value of neighboring plots, and that attracted more buyers. The machine fed itself. The buyers, war veterans, young families, immigrants in search of the California dream, got excited seeing that map full of names and roundabouts, convinced it was the blueprint for their future. Many never set foot in the desert. The ink and paper were enough for them to believe in that future. And the dream, at first, seemed real. The plots appreciated on paper, and the first buyers watched their fictional savings grow. Sales skyrocketed. The money flowed. In a few years, thousands of plots changed hands without a single house being built. In 1965, California City was officially incorporated as a municipality. On paper, it was a giant, the third largest city in California by area. A feat of planning and marketing. But on that immense board of named streets, almost no one lived. By 1969, the population barely reached 1,300 souls. Mendelsohn, who always knew how to read the moment, sold his shares to Great Western United Corporation. He retired before the desert wind blew his house of cards away. By then, he had moved to Texas, where he started new projects, far from the dust and the lawsuits. The dream of the desert metropolis was beginning to evaporate, but its creator was already far from the dust and the disputes. Shortly after, the promises crumbled. The buyers discovered that services didn't arrive, that infrastructure was conspicuously absent. That wasn't a city, it was a mirage with a zip code, thousands of property titles over sand and sagebrush, with no chance of building or reselling. The Federal Trade Commission, alerted by a wave of complaints, opened an investigation for deceptive marketing. The company was sued and, in the early 80s, filed for bankruptcy. Mendelsohn, meanwhile, had already vanished from the map. He died in 1984, without ever facing a trial, without giving back a single penny. He left behind a legacy of empty lots and broken hopes. But California City didn't disappear. In 1990, it housed 6,500 residents. By 2019, fewer than 15,000, many of them working at the area's correctional facility. A city designed to compete with Los Angeles, economically sustained by a prison. The sandy streets stretch for miles, dusty and useless. On the ground, the silence is so thick you can hear the power lines crossing the valley, barely feeding any homes. Anyone flying over it today sees the perfect grid of a metropolis that never was, thousands of plotted blocks that never held a home. The few curious visitors find a lunar landscape dotted with traffic signs without traffic, and every now and then, a solitary streetlight glowing in the middle of nowhere. But the pattern was too profitable to die. 4 decades later, another salesman repeated the formula. This time, with internet ads and free stays at a ranch. Between 2018 and 2020, reporter Emily Guerin uncovered the new chapter of the same old script. With undercover recordings, Guerin showed how the salesman subjected the victims to aggressive pressure tactics. Silver Saddle Ranch and Club operated in California City, luring buyers, Filipinos, Chinese, Latinos, many of them immigrants with limited English. They offered them free lodging and desert rides, painting it as a promising luxury opportunity. The salesman locked them in improvised sales rooms, with the blinds down and the air conditioning on low, pressuring them for hours to sign purchase contracts for barren land. Many gave in, worn down by the siege and the promise of a bargain. They showed them the desert with sweet-sounding words and convinced them they were acquiring their piece of the American dream. The same lie, the same brochure with a different logo, the same strategy of selling sand as gold. The California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation filed a fraud lawsuit and managed to shut the business down. But many lots were already sold, and the buyers, as in the 60s, were left with sand and a piece of paper. The story of California City is not just the story of a real estate fraud. It's a natural experiment on the relationship between trust and value. Mendelsohn, the sociologist, sensed it better than the economists. People don't buy land, they buy the promise of a life they don't have. Mendelsohn sold that trust, and people bought it because they wanted to believe. Today, that trust remains buried under the sand of the Mojave. On the city plan, an artificial lake is drawn that never received water. Dozens of intersections have traffic lights that control nothing. Streets that lead nowhere. Lots that wait for residents who never arrived. And that's the paradox, a desert plotted, parceled, and sold, but never inhabited. Because that's the power of a brochure, turning the desert into a mirage that sells itself over and over to anyone who dares to dream without learning the lesson.